An HOA Karen showed up at my private ranch and told me, "This is community property now. No notice, no paperwork, just entitlement." So instead of arguing, I did something completely legal that shocked the entire neighborhood. Exposed the HOA's lies and forced them to pay in court. Stick around because the electric fence was just the beginning. It started like any normal morning on my ranch, quiet. Open land. The kind of peace you only get when your nearest neighbor is a fence post and a cow. I was checking the perimeter, coffee in hand, when an unfamiliar SUV rolled up the dirt road like it owned the place. Out stepped a woman with a clipboard, oversized sunglasses, and that unmistakable posture of someone who's never been told no in her life. Before I could even ask who she was, she pointed past me at my land and said, "You know this is community property, right?" No introduction, no greeting, just entitlement. Served cold. I honestly laughed at first. I thought it was a joke, some confused tourist or maybe someone lost. But she didn't laugh back. She straightened her papers and told me she was from the HOA, and that several residents had concerns about my ranch. According to her, people had been walking their dogs, jogging, even letting their kids play on my land for years. And now that made it shared space. She said it like it was a fact, not an opinion. When I told her this ranch had been in my family for generations and that it was clearly private property, her tone shifted instantly. The smile disappeared. The voice hardened. "That's not how community use works," she said. That's when I realized this wasn't confusion, this was a power move. She began listing imaginary violations. No trespassing signs were unwelcoming. My fencing was hostile, and my refusal to allow access was against community values. I asked her to show me any document proving her claim. She waved the clipboard and said the HOA bylaws were all the authority she needed. I told her HOA bylaws don't override county land records. She scoffed, rolled her eyes, and said, "We'll see about that." Neighbors started gathering at the edge of the road, watching like it was free entertainment. The HOA Karen noticed the audience and got louder, repeating, "Community property," over and over as if saying it enough times would magically make it true. She warned me that if I didn't cooperate, the HOA could take action, fines, legal steps, maybe even forced access. The confidence in her voice was unreal. She truly believed she could walk onto someone else's ranch and rewrite reality. I calmly told her she was trespassing and asked her to leave. That pushed her over the edge. She snapped that I didn't get to decide that anymore, that the community had rights, and that I'd regret being difficult. Then she turned around, got back into her SUV, and drove off like she just won something. Standing there in the dust, watching her disappear down the road, I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. Not even close. 2 days after that bizarre confrontation, a thick envelope showed up in my mailbox with the HOA's logo stamped across the front like a threat. Inside was a formal-looking letter filled with legal language clearly meant to intimidate, claiming that my ranch fell within common use boundaries and had been treated as shared land by the community for years. According to them, that history alone gave the HOA the right to regulate access, impose rules, and even override my objections. They weren't asking. They were informing me. The tone made it very clear they expected me to fold. The letter cited HOA bylaws, selective clauses, and vague references to established community precedent. There was no survey map attached, no deed, no county documentation, just a lot of words arranged to sound official. They demanded I remove my restrictive barriers, allow open access during daylight hours, and cease any actions that could be interpreted as discouraging community use. At the bottom, in bold, was the real threat. Noncompliance could result in daily fines, legal action, and recovery of costs through court proceedings. They even had the nerve to give me a deadline. What really got under my skin wasn't just the audacity, it was how confident they were in being wrong. They acted as if repetition could replace proof, as if calling something community property enough times would make the law bend to their feelings. I could tell this wasn't their first time pulling a stunt like this. Somewhere along the line, someone else probably caved. And that small victory turned into a pattern of bullying. This was an HOA used to getting its way through pressure. No facts. I called the number listed on the letter, hoping naively that there had been some massive misunderstanding. Instead, I got the same Karen from the ranch, now armed with legal jargon and a smug sense of authority. She told me the board had voted unanimously and that my refusal to cooperate was disruptive to community harmony. When I asked her how an HOA could claim land that wasn't even inside their subdivision, she brushed it off and said, "Boundaries evolve." That was the moment I realized logic had left the building. She warned me that fighting the HOA would be expensive, stressful, and pointless. She said lawyers always side with associations, and judges hate uncooperative landowners. It was a textbook scare tactic, and she delivered it like she'd practiced in the mirror. When I told her I'd be reviewing the matter with my own attorney, she laughed and said, "Good luck." That laugh wasn't confidence, it was expectation. She expected me to quit. But instead of backing down, something clicked. This wasn't just about land anymore. It was about an HOA trying to rewrite ownership through intimidation. They had drawn a line in the dirt, and by sending that letter, they made one mistake they couldn't undo. They put their lie in writing. After that phone call, I stopped reacting emotionally and started preparing. If the HOA wanted paperwork, I was going to drown them in it. I went straight to the county records office and requested everything tied to my ranch deeds: historical transfers, parcel boundaries, and zoning classifications. What I found wasn't complicated at all. The land was clearly labeled, clearly surveyed, and clearly mine. The boundaries had been established decades ago, updated properly, and never once intersected with the HOA's subdivision. There was no gray area, no overlap, no evolving boundary. Nonsense. Just hard lines on official maps. I didn't stop there. I pulled survey maps going back years, including the most recent professional survey that showed my property lines down to the inch. Iron pins were marked, coordinates matched, and every measurement aligned with the county's records. I walked the land with those maps in hand, checking fence lines and markers, confirming what I already knew. The HOA's claim wasn't just weak, it was completely fabricated. They weren't misinterpreting the law. They were ignoring it. Next, I reviewed the HOA's own documents. Their bylaws, covenants, and community plats were publicly filed, and reading them was almost laughable. The subdivision ended well before my ranch began. Their community areas were limited to internal green spaces, sidewalks, and shared amenities, none of which even came close to my land. There was no easement, no right-of-way, no historical access agreement. Nothing. The only reason residents had been walking across my ranch was because no one had stopped them before. I also spoke with a local land use attorney, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted confirmation from someone who deals with this kind of overreach regularly. After reviewing everything, he shook his head and said this was one of the clearest cases of HOA bullying he'd seen. He explained that long-term use doesn't magically convert private property into community land, especially without written agreements or recorded easements. Trespassing doesn't become a right just because it has been tolerated. That single sentence stuck with me. Armed with facts, I sent a formal response to the HOA. I included copies of deeds, certified survey maps, and highlighted county records. I cited state property law, clarified the absence of any easements, and formally demanded that they cease all claims regarding my ranch. I also made it clear that any further attempts to assert control over my land would be treated as harassment and trespass. This time, everything was documented, dated, and sent by certified mail. The response from the HOA was silence. No apology, no acknowledgement, just quiet. And that silence said everything. They knew they were wrong. They counted on intimidation, not resistance. But now they had a problem. Because when someone ignores clear evidence and keeps pushing anyway, it stops being a misunderstanding and starts becoming a liability. When the HOA went silent, I knew exactly what that meant. They weren't backing off. They were regrouping. And sure enough, within days I started noticing more accidental walkers cutting across my ranch, dog owners letting their pets roam, kids riding bikes like it was a public trail. It was obvious the HOA hadn't told anyone to stop. If anything, they were daring me to enforce my own boundaries. So I decided it was time to make those boundaries impossible to ignore. I hired a licensed contractor and had a new fence installed precisely along the surveyed property line. Not inside it, not outside it, right on the line. And not just any fence, an electric livestock fence. Fully legal, fully permitted, and clearly marked with warning signs at proper intervals. This wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity. The fence was designed to deter, not injure. A sharp reminder, not a trap. Still, the moment it went up, the neighborhood exploded. Within hours, my phone was lighting up with calls and messages. People were outraged that they could no longer use land they had never owned. The HOA Karen showed up again, clipboard in hand, acting like I'd personally insulted her. She accused me of creating a hostile environment and endangering residents. I calmly pointed to the warning signs, the permits, and the survey stakes still visible in the ground. I told her the fence was entirely within my legal rights and that it was installed to prevent trespassing. She didn't like that answer. She threatened emergency HOA meetings, fines, and legal action. She claimed the fence reduced property values and violated community standards. I reminded her again that my ranch was not part of the community. That's when she really lost it. She demanded I shut off the fence immediately. I refused. I told her any further presence on my land would be considered trespassing and documented. The look on her face was pure disbelief. She was used to control. She wasn't used to limits. And then came the complaints. Someone's dog got a harmless zap after ignoring the warning signs. A jogger brushed the wire and learned the hard way that private property means private. Suddenly, the HOA was dealing with angry residents asking why they'd been told the land was community property in the first place. The narrative started cracking. People realized they'd been misled. The HOA's legal threats returned. But this time they sounded different, less confident, more defensive. They demanded I remove the fence pending resolution. I responded through my attorney, reiterating the legality of the fence and warning them that continued interference would escalate the matter. That was the moment the power shifted. The fence wasn't just a boundary anymore. It was proof that I wasn't bluffing, and proof that the HOA's imaginary authority stopped exactly where my land began. By trying to push past that fence both literally and legally, the HOA exposed themselves. And once that happened, there was no going back. The HOA finally did what bullies always do when they stop getting their way. They ran to court. A formal lawsuit landed on my desk claiming the electric fence was unlawful, dangerous, and installed in bad faith to intimidate residents. They asked the court to force me to remove it, grant community access to my ranch, and fine me for violating HOA standards. Reading it was almost surreal. They were still pretending they had authority over land they didn't own. And now they were putting that fantasy in front of a judge. This time, I didn't even feel angry. I felt prepared. My attorney filed a response backed by certified surveys, county deeds, zoning records, permit approvals, and photographs of the clearly marked fence. We included documentation of the HOA's threats, misleading notices, and their continued encouragement of trespassing. Every claim they made was countered with evidence, not opinions, not assumptions, evidence. When the court date arrived, the contrast was obvious. The HOA showed up with board members and a lawyer who looked increasingly uncomfortable as the facts were laid out. Their argument hinged on community use and shared expectation, neither of which carries weight without legal backing. The judge asked one simple question that shifted the entire room. Do you have a recorded easement or ownership interest in this property? The answer was no. Everything after that unraveled quickly. The judge ruled that my ranch was unequivocally private property and that the electric fence was lawful, properly installed, and fully within my rights. But it didn't stop there. The court found that the HOA had acted in bad faith by knowingly misrepresenting ownership, issuing baseless threats, and encouraging residents to trespass. That finding opened the door to consequences they clearly hadn't anticipated. The HOA was ordered to pay my legal fees, court costs, and damages related to harassment and interference with property rights. They were also instructed to formally notify all residents that the ranch was private land and that any future trespassing would be the responsibility of the individual, not the association. Watching the HOA Karen's face as that order was read was something I'll never forget. All that confidence gone. After the ruling, the HOA's tune changed overnight. The letters stopped. The threats disappeared. Residents stayed off the land. The fence remained. What had started as an attempted land grab ended as a public embarrassment and a costly lesson in overreach. They didn't just lose the case, they lost credibility. In the end, the ranch was quieter than ever. No walkers, no meetings, no clipboards, just open land, clear boundaries, and the satisfaction of knowing that standing your ground legally and calmly can make even the loudest authority figures pay for crossing the line. If you enjoy watching entitled HOAs get exposed and actually held accountable, make sure you subscribe. These stories are real. They were messy, and they don't end the way Karens expect. Subscribe because the next HOA disaster might be even worse than this one.